Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Five levels of pleasure. No, I should say it like this. 5 levels of the pleasure ladder. ... Is this the spiritual diet, the latest diet plan on the market? Well, if you've had too many Hanukkah jelly donuts and fried potato pancakes getting you up in your weight, or maybe you put on weight during the coronavirus lockdowns, I think I've done both. Our next guest is going to take all of us through her life as she attended Harvard University as a secular Jew, and through the years battling her weight, how she grew not only spiritually, but also discovered a so-called spiritual diet that was the key to her losing and maintaining her weight. And she's going to be sharing that with us here on the show. I have to say I'm curious, especially for someone who sits a lot at her desk during the day working, and the weight can slowly come on. So what is her secret? What did she learn when she was on her spiritual journey that says, or that gave her information on how she could lose and maintain her weight? And I have seen her, and she is thin, and I'm jealous. So maybe you and I, who may have had too many, fried foods or gained weight during the corona lockdowns, will be able to gain some insight into filling that hole, not our mouths, but that hole in our souls that make us want to go for the food. And I'm very curious how she's going to do that. And we're going to be speaking with her when we get back. She's written many books, and she'll be telling us about those as well. So don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Tamar Yonah Show here at Israel News Talk Radio. And if you have any comments or questions afterwards, you can write me and I'll forward letters to her. Our guest today. My email, Tamar, Tamar, at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. We'll be right back.
The return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel was prophesied in the Bible thousands of years ago and is coming true today. Shalom. Join me, Joshua Wander, on Israel Unplugged. Listen in as we delve into the spiritual and physical aspects of the Jewish return to Zion. We'll discuss the biblically mandated, historic, and of course practical understandings of this incredible transition from exile to redemption. That's Israel Unplugged, every Monday on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
Welcome back to the Tamar Yonah Show here at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. And we're talking today about the 5 levels of the pleasure ladder. Is this the new craze, a new diet called the spiritual diet? Well, we're going to find out about that. If you've eaten too many potato pancakes and jelly donuts during the Hanukkah holiday, or maybe you put on weight during the coronavirus lockdowns, you were depressed, you didn't move around. What's the reason? We don't know. But our next guest is going to take us through her life as she attended Harvard University as a secular Jew, and through the years battling her weight, she grew not only spiritually, but also discovered a so-called spiritual diet that was the key to her losing and maintaining her weight. Our guest is Bracha Getz. She's a Harvard-educated author of, get this, 38 books that help children's souls shine. So if you're looking for a good kids book, you're going to want to check out her Amazon page. She also wrote a fascinating book, or rather a candid memoir, for adults in her book entitled Searching for God in the Garbage, where she talks about growing up, going to Harvard, yo-yo dieting, and her discovery of God, her spiritual journey, and her learning about the 5 levels of the pleasure ladder. You can find her on Amazon by plugging in her name, Bracha Getz. I'm going to spell that Bracha, and then her last name, Goetz. So I want to welcome to the show, Bracha Getz.
Hello, so happy to be here. Thank you.
I'm thrilled to have you here because I know that I put on some weight during the corona lockdowns, and I'm sure after Hanukkah's over, I'm going to see that scale go up maybe a little bit more, and a lot of other listeners as well. And we want to find out what your secret is, and we're very curious when we hear about the 5 levels of the pleasure ladder. That sounds so intriguing, so we want to learn about that as well. So let's start out with your manifesto, your book that you wrote called Searching for God in the Garbage. Why did you write this, and what is it about?
Yeah, I know it's a really strange title, kind of provocative title, because why was I searching for God in the garbage? Because really, God has been thrown away in many places. It was thrown away in my childhood. It was something that wasn't discussed, wasn't talked about. I know my parents were wonderful people, but my father, I know, didn't believe in God. He said he was agnostic. I don't know. But I was searching. I kept feeling that something was missing from my life, even though I had a wonderful, loving parents. Everything was really sweet. And what was missing? I didn't know. So I just kept searching into all different religions. I got involved in Christian Science, branches of Buddhism, social action, social justice, environmentalism, and education. I threw myself into education all the time, searching for knowledge, searching for wisdom, searching for the purpose to life. That's what I was searching for. I couldn't believe we just wake up, to get up, to go to work, to make money, to eat, to go to work, to make money, to eat. What is this all for? And that's what I was searching to find out. So
I think it's important to tell our listeners also that you grew up in the 1960s when this was happening, very common in that generation. People were looking for more than just materialism. They wanted something more. But go ahead.
Yes. And I guess that's because our parents, they didn't grow up with Judaism. It had already been tossed. It had been tossed in the ocean when they came from Europe, the tefillin were thrown overboard. So my parents didn't grow up with a Jewish education. So they were so happy to have the materialistic, we weren't wealthy, but, just to have basic things in their life, they were so happy with that. They weren't searching for spirituality. I was already given the basics, so I could look for something more. And so that's what I was, and I think that was our generation. We were able to look for spirituality because we had the basic physical needs taken care of in our lives.
All right, so basically you were living the American dream. You were a nice Jewish girl from the suburbs. You went to, am I correct? So you grew up in the suburbs?
Well, I grew up in Queens in New York.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And then you're a smart girl. You go to Harvard. You excel there. You finish a lot of your credits even before, your time was up there. You were studying medicine. What were you studying there?
Yes, right. I wanted to be a psychiatrist. That was my goal. Yes.
Okay. And during that time, you're also finding your femininity. You start to have boyfriends, non-Jewish boyfriends, of course. And tell us about your spurt of growth there and discovering who you were as an adult now.
Yes, I remember. And one real turning point was when I was invited to this really exclusive garden party. Why? Because my boyfriend, who was Catholic at the time, he was his father was a big corporate lawyer, so I was invited to this party with Kennedys, Rockefellers, Moynahans, and I felt like this is it. this is what everybody's striving for. Now I've made it. So I feel this was a huge blessing. I got to this party and I find there's nothing there. Everybody there is looking beyond who they're talking to, looking for something more as well. And then it started pouring on this beautiful day. There was this huge thunderstorm and I was in ecstasy and I felt there's something more. I have proof. Even these powerful people, they couldn't stop the rain from coming down. There's something greater, but what is it? Like, I've gotten to the top and there's nothing there. Of the top which everybody's striving for, with the fame and the power and the wealth, there's nothing up there on this mountain, on this mountaintop. So what is it? That's something that came to me at Harvard. And meanwhile, I would say that's when the crazy dieting started. I was dieting and trying to be like the thin look that I saw the wealthy people had there, and just trying to fit in all those ways. And basically, I can't say that I had anorexia. Like, I was never diagnosed. I never got terribly ill or hospitalized, but, I was successful at dieting, getting thin and all that stuff. But what happened is, by the time I got to medical school, it was such a crazy yo-yo dieting between binging and the dieting, one or the other. So it was really horrible. And that's when I would say I had a food addiction, because when your life becomes unmanageable, that's really the definition of what an addiction is. My life had become unmanageable. It was taking up so much of my energy and my mental energy, all this craziness about dieting, really an obsessive concentration, focus on this, when I could be doing so many other wonderful things. This is what was taking up my time and energy.
All right. Yeah. And so you didn't become a doctor in the end, did you?
No, my mother had this great idea. Go to Israel for the summer. Maybe she'll meet someone Jewish. So in between my first and second year of medical school, for 6 weeks, I went to Israel. I was volunteering at Hadassah Hospital on the oncology ward, basically just counseling families going through difficult time with cancer. And when I knew I was going to Israel, my mother basically said, do whatever you want in Israel, but just don't contact this one guy who became a religious fanatic, I knew him from childhood, so of course, in my rebellious way, I contacted him right away, and he responded back to me in one of those aerograms, I said to him, I want to know from my patients what the purpose of life is. How can I help my patients if I don't even understand it? He said, right. Don't worry about your patients, for yourself. I will take you to some schools. You'll learn about the purpose of life. So he met me there in the cafeteria of Hadassah, and he took me. One day he took me to Neve Yerushalayim. Another day he took me to Or Sameach, had a small women's division. I ended up going to a lot of classes at Or Sameach, where they were so excited to have me. It had just begun. It was a really small group. And I come in, and within a week, I had moved in. My first class there, I was in ecstasy. I didn't know what half the words meant. It was in Hebrew. But yet I felt like my soul was jumping for joy. I was drawing pictures while I was in the class, and it was a caricature of a creature jumping off the world, screaming, yay! Like my soul was celebrating. I felt, although I had found pieces of truth in different religions that I'd studied, nothing fit like a puzzle piece, like my own heritage. When I got to study the Torah in depth, and it just fit right in. I felt so much joy. And I moved in after a week to Or Sameach.
Okay, so when she says Or Sameach, this is just the name of one of the higher learning of Torah institutes. It's a yeshiva for women. And approximately what year did this happen?
Yeah, Or Sameach is now only for men, but at that time they had a small women's division that I was in. So this was 1978, the summer of 78.
Okay. All right. I was here in 1978 also. That's pretty cool. We didn't bump into each other. Too bad. All right. And did you leave medical school and then you decided to stay in Israel, or did you go back to the States after the summer?
I took a year's leave of absence. I said I'm taking a year's leave of absence. First, I was going to transfer to Tel Aviv University. They had a medical school with for English-speaking students. But then I decided, no, I really want to devote myself to studying the Torah and learning everything I had been missing. So that's what I did. I said, I'm staying here. Of course, my parents were flipping out in America. I mean, they thought I joined a cult. The medical school gave me a year's leave of absence.
Okay,
but,
you know what? Hold it right there. We have to go to a break. We're going to be right back.
Hi, everyone. This is Andrea Siminto from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together, we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Siminto, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Did you know this psalm and many others were composed by a Jewish shepherd and musician who later became a king? Would you like to know some of the inner meanings of psalms to help you connect with God and strengthen your soul? An exciting and easy-to-read book is now available which will help you do just that. Software for the Soul, Psalms for Everyone, available on Kindle, Audible, and Amazon.com. Software for the Soul.
All right, we're back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, and we're speaking with Bracha Getz. She's a Harvard-educated author of 38 books that helps children's souls shine. So if you have kids or you want to buy a birthday present or any type of birth presents even, you might want to go and search her Amazon page and look at the many books that she has there. But we're talking about her book that she wrote about her life, and that's called Searching for God in the Garbage. And in the last segment, Bracha, you were telling us that you, in the middle of med school at Harvard University, you decided by your parents' suggestion to take a 6 weeks off to go visit Israel. Your parents were hoping you'd meet a nice Jewish boy because you were going out with a non-Jewish boy at that time, I understand. And you just fell in love with Israel. You work in the hospital, but then you got into learning in a yeshiva, which is a institute of higher Torah learning, and you fell in love with the learning that you had there, and you ended up staying for?
Yes, I just had a 6-week vacation between my first and second year of medical school, and I ended up staying for 10 years. Basically, I didn't end up going back to America until my parents weren't well 10 years later, and we returned to America. I didn't return by myself either. By then, I had married, and I had 5 children at that point, 10 years down the road. So, yeah.
Did your parents come to your wedding?
What was that?
Did your parents come to your wedding?
They did. It was very hard for them. They really came. They wanted to kidnap me and take me to Australia at the time. You know, they did not want me. My mother was wearing sunglasses at the wedding, and I must say, I didn't have compassion for them. Years later, I can have compassion for what they had gone through. At that point, I was trying so hard to stay strong in keeping to the truth that I had discovered in my life, but it really was hard for my parents. My drastic changes, you know, how I changed my life like that and basically threw away my medical school education, you know, and did this.
Yeah, that must have been daunting for your parents.
It was. They went to, actually, the head of oncology at Hadassah, the person that helped me get the volunteer position, and they spoke to him, and they thought that he might convince me to leave. And he actually said to them the opposite, which was a big turning point for my parents. He said, there's so few people doing what your daughter is doing, like giving up a medical career in order to devote herself to Judaism and try to help more people connect to their Jewish roots. She's doing something really important. So I think it's a great thing. And they were astounded. It wasn't the answer they expected from him. Yeah.
All right. So where did your yo-yo dieting, enter the picture?
Yes, it's interesting because I looked successful on the outside. Inside, I was getting more and more miserable as this took over my life. I was like the expert at Harvard on the subject of anorexia. I was giving seminars there. It was writing chapters in books that even then as an undergraduate. And here, so intellectually, I got how serious this was, how negative this behavior was, and yet I couldn't stop it. So an intellectual understanding is never enough. So what happened, and it was really interesting, is that by the time I was in medical school and I was doing such bizarre behaviors, which is what goes along with addictions, you do crazy things for your addictions.
Like?
I went to a psychiatrist once because I was really feeling so whacked out about everything. He was a Japanese psychiatrist, and he said to me, I think you're crazier than you are, because when I feel a feeling when you go to Israel this summer, you're going to find yourself spiritually, and that's really what you're looking for. It was amazing. It was amazing that Japanese psychiatrist could pick that up about me, which I wasn't even aware, and it was just like a one-time meeting, and he could sense that. Fascinating. Anyway, what happened is Rabbi Noah Weinberg of Eshet Torah, his teachings affected me so much. I wasn't attending Eshet Torah. The friend that I met there was, and but I was reading things from him, and I would go to his wife's classes in her homes, Rebbetzin Dina Weinberg, and he had this big poster up in the Old City. It was a picture of a bagel, a big overstuffed bagel with cream cheese and lox pouring out of it. And it said, is this the culmination of like 3,500 years of Jewish history? Then it's true, because when I was searching for spirituality, all I could find were these bagels and lox brunches to go to, where it was nothing spiritual was going on. And like there I saw that, and I felt like, oh my goodness. And then he would give a talk and he'd say, are you eating to live or living to eat? And I felt like, how does he know what's going on inside of me? This is amazing. So Rabbi Noah Weinberg had the ability to mine the Torah and be able to present it in a way that people who did not have a background could relate. He would not talk about who would be running who wants to do commandments to serve God. Who would be running to do that? No, he talked about who wants to have the greatest pleasure possible in life. This is what Rabbi Noah Weinberg realized would draw people, and it does. And what I'm doing now is really showing how food addictions are so widespread. They're the most addictions altogether are widespread right now, but food addictions are the most common of all. And I want to show how Rabbi Noah Weinberg's, the principles that he brought forth about the 5 levels of pleasure, how much they relate to our everyday life, even especially right now during the pandemic. They are so relatable. And okay, now too with Hanukkah, with so much greasy stuff to eat that adds a lot of calories. So I say, I just made this up this week. Gain joy instead of pounds. Basically, that's it, because this is what he's teaching, and this is so amazing. There are 5 levels of pleasure, and this is taught. The 5 levels of pleasure are taught in Sefer HaMitzvos, the book of mitzvahs, and we learn in Mesilas Yesharim, the path of the just. We learn that the purpose of life is to experience the greatest pleasure possible. So all this was mined by Rabbi Noah Weinberg to make this is such relevant wisdom for all of our lives. The purpose of life is to experience the greatest pleasure possible. What is the greatest pleasure possible? What are the most lasting pleasures? That's what we're going to see. And then what I realized over this Pesach, over Passover, when I was studying, is that in Derech Hashem, which is also written by the same author of Mesilas Yesharim. Derech Hashem is the way of God. This is all written by the Ramchal, who was a master of Kabbalah, and
Jewish mysticism.
That's Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. Mm-hmm. What he taught is that there's 5 levels to the human soul. That means all humans. This refers to all humans, that there are 5 levels of, and I was realizing that these 5 levels of the soul, they must correspond to the 5 levels of pleasure. And when I put them together, you'll see how amazingly they correspond. So what's on the bottom level are all the physical pleasures. That corresponds to the nefesh. The nefesh is our life force. It's the part of our soul that is elevated by the physical pleasures. So in other words, God put all these pleasures on earth. Exactly. They didn't have to be there. Like food, the most basic pleasure. It could have been that we didn't need any food to survive, or it could have been that we took a tasteless pill every day or every so often. But no, God wanted it to be the most pleasurable experience possible. So we get beautiful, bright fruit that only becomes bright and beautiful when it's ripest and ready for us to eat. That's how we know when it's ready. In fact, that's what my children's book, Hashem's Candy Store, is about. All the things we learned, the wisdom from the fruit and vegetables in the Almighty's world. So we have it. It looks beautiful. It tastes wonderful, and it smells beautiful. God wants everything in our natural world was designed to give us tremendous pleasure. So it was designed to uplift our soul through this tremendous pleasure. The problem is we get stuck on the physical level, and we don't lead it to uplift our soul. But if we recognize what it was designed for, that changes the whole paradigm. So I'm presenting this framework. This actually helps us to not need our addictions anymore because we are satisfying our soul. It's that inner emptiness that keeps a person overeating. And when we recognize that inner emptiness is not a physical hunger, it's a spiritual hunger. And that's why we overdo it. So basically, let's say a person is overeating. And so I suggest ask yourself this one simple question. Is it my body that's hungry or my soul? And you will know the answer, because when you're overeating, people know when they're overeating. They know when they have physically had enough and they're just eating to get the pleasure to keep going. So here's the trick. The answer is add in another pleasure. This concept is not, this whole perspective is not about restrictions. It's not about denying yourself pleasure. It's about adding more pleasure to your life. That's what's so transformative about this idea. So basically, when you are overeating food, think of something else that gives you pleasure. Or you could even have it lined up beforehand. You can
hold it right there. We have to go to a break, but we're going to be back and find out about having even more pleasure in our lives. Don't go anywhere.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we're going to be finding out about the 5 levels of the pleasure ladder. We're going to learn how to add more pleasure to our lives as we subtract some of the pounds that we've gained. And our guest is Bracha Getz. She is a Harvard-educated author of 38 books that helps children's souls shine. She also wrote a memoir of her life called Searching for God in the Garbage. And she's talking about her spiritual journey and how it's helped her learn to find pleasure from other things than just eating. And Bracha, where would you like to start from?
Yes, so let's say you're in the middle of overeating. You know you're overeating. Here's what you could do. So you ask the question, is it my body that's hungry or my soul? What happens? The brainstem is being activated when you're eating, when you're binging, when you're overeating. You're eating out of a sense of scarcity, a sense of fear. There's not enough for you. There's not enough joy. There's not enough pleasure, so I got to keep eating what's in front of me. That's where you're operating from. So what happens is when you ask the question, is it my body that's hungry or my soul? Immediately the neurons start firing in your prefrontal cortex. They go all the way up to your higher level brain, and you start with that question. It raises your consciousness, and you start thinking about, what else could I be doing right now? What else could bring me pleasure? Let's say you push a button and you start listening to music, and you hear the music, you feel like stretching or dancing. If you start moving around, you are just not going to be drawn to to finishing the bag of potato chips anymore. You're going to be feeling differently. A different pleasure is going to take over you. Or let's say you open the door, you open the window, you step outside for a minute. You feel the cool, brisk air on your face, or you feel the sunshine, or you feel a breeze. Suddenly, the bag of chocolate chip cookies isn't calling your name as loudly as before. Something has changed inside of you. You're getting a different pleasure, and it's still on the level of physicality. It's enlivening your nefesh. It's enlivening your nefesh. It's bringing you a more lasting pleasure. Okay, so now how can we move up to an even higher level? What's the next level of pleasure? The next level of pleasure is love. This corresponds to ruach, appreciating somebody else's spirit. Ruach is spirit. So what is love? According to Rabbi Noah Weinberg, he has a very awesome definition. It's not sitting by the phone and waiting for someone to call you and feeling lonely, you're not loved enough. No, it's the emotional pleasure that you get by focusing on the virtues of another. So each level here is empowering. All of these, you never have to wait for someone else to give you the pleasure. Each of these pleasures you bring into yourself. You could have each of these 5 levels of pleasure. You could experience them even in prison. And probably Yosef Hatzadik did. That's exactly it. You can experience these pleasures anywhere, at any time, at any moment. You can bring these into your life. So basically, how do you experience love? You focus on the virtues of another. When you are doing that, you are not focusing on, again, what you're lacking. It's that feeling of alienation in your life, that feeling of being separate. That's what makes a person overeat. So it's connection that makes a person brings a person joy. At each level, you'll see there's a higher level of connection. And the physical level, we're connecting to another object in our physical, natural world. Love, we're connecting to another person. Even just in our minds, we're focusing on something we appreciate about someone. What's on the third level? Meaning. This is the level of the soul of neshama. This is what was starving in my life. That's what was missing in my life, was meaning. I had a sweet and loving life, but I didn't understand the meaning to it all. And that framework made everything just feel empty. So meaning, doing something meaningful, that takes you out of yourself, connecting again to the wider world. And all of this brings you more and more lasting pleasure. What's on the fourth level? Creativity. Here, we're actually adding something to the world. This corresponds to the fourth level, which is Chaya, bringing life, bringing more life into the world. We are tapping into the creative flow of the universe. What a joy that is. You know, when you are doing something creative, you don't feel like eating, you don't feel like sleeping. You are in such a great state. And what's the highest level of all? Transcendence. Transcendence is recognized, and that's corresponds to Yechida, the unique essence, the oneness. It's when we see how everything is connected to Source, and how everybody and everything we know, the veil of separation is lifted, and we see the depth behind everything. We see how everything is really one. This is now these two highest levels, the two highest levels of the soul and the two highest levels of pleasure, we only get glimpses of in this world. Like Shabbos is a glimpse of the world to come. We only get glimpses of these two highest levels. They're really what is coming to us in the world to come. They're the highest levels of pleasure, of endless creativity, of endless awe, of seeing the unity in everything. When we get that, that's in the world to come. So the main levels we're operating on now are the three lower levels, although we do get glimpses like under a starry sky. There's this feeling of transcendence and awe and unity. And when we've had those nights under a sky, they stay with us forever. They give us a lasting pleasure that we can access at any moment. So we're mainly on these other three levels, but we know where we're reaching. And this whole framework can help us to overcome addictions, knowing when we're overeating, it's just because we're stuck. There's really an abundance of pleasure. The Almighty made this world for our pleasure. That's what we were created for. We were designed. What does a parent want for their children? They want their children to experience the greatest pleasure possible in life. That's what the Almighty wants for us, to experience the greatest pleasure possible. What is the ticket to go from one level to another? What is the ticket to experience all this joy? Gratitude. Gratitude is the ticket. When we make these blessings, when we feel the blessings, when we really enjoy all the gifts that God has given us, that's the gratitude. And gratitude for love, gratitude for appreciating this earth, meaning, creativity, adding to it, the ultimate gratitude of transcendence. So this is the gift I want to give everybody for Hanukkah. It's a gift that lasts forever. I hope that you can all add more and more joy into your lives. Whenever you feel stuck and you're overeating because you want the pleasure to keep lasting, think to yourself, what else? How else can I bring pleasure into my life? This very moment. And it is by focusing on all that you have. When we focus on all that we have in that moment, we are not focusing on what we're lacking. So every moment of gratitude brings us joy, fills us up, and that's what helps our souls to shine. This is the perfect time for our souls to shine on Hanukkah. If you got this lift during Hanukkah, this is a really great gift to have for the rest of your life. And that's why I write books for children, so they'll have these gifts from early on forever for their lives, the happiness skills that we all need.
Bracha, what if you just want a cigarette and a cup of coffee? And now, I don't smoke, I've never smoked, but I know that there are people, they just want to sit back and have a cigarette and a cup of coffee, and that's their spiritual, they can just kind of like connect again and recharge. What would you tell somebody who's addicted?
I think cigarettes are really not healthy for a person, and we do need to guard our bodies. That's a very important mitzvah. It's a way that we connect to God, by guarding the body, the wonderful bodies that God has given us. It's an appreciation for our bodies to do good things for our bodies. So when we eat healthfully and when we exercise and dance and move, our bodies are meant to move. When we do these things the way we were naturally made to be, that's doing things aligned with the way that Hashem made us. God made us to have the most pleasure in life. So it gives you some comfort. It may give you some comfort, but as Rabbi Noah Weinberg explained, comfort is the opposite of pleasure is not pain, because pain can be involved in pleasure. There are challenges in life. We're climbing a mountain that could be painful. Giving birth is painful. Comfort is the opposite of pleasure. Comfort, sitting back and smoking the cigarette, it may feel comfortable, but it's taking us away from the greater pleasure that's possible in our lives.
Wow.
And we should be reaching for higher pleasures. And the more healthfully we eat whole foods, foods that are closer in nature to the way God made them, the less processed they are, the better, basically. So we don't have to have complicated diets, but just eating in a healthy way is the way God intended.
We're at the end of the show. I want you very quickly in 15 seconds, just go over again the 5 pleasure ladder.
Pleasure. Okay. Physical. Love, meaning, creativity, transcendence. Those are the 5 levels, and they correspond to the 5 levels of the human soul.
And you talk about that in your book?
Excuse me?
And you talk about that in your book, Searching for God in the Garbage.
A little bit. I discover at the end. You know, this is what...
Because I only got to page 80-something so far, but I wanted to get you on before Hanukkah was over, so I made an exception. Usually I like to read a whole book beforehand. But I want to thank you. Everybody can get that in her book. Again, Searching for God in the Garbage. We're speaking with Bracha Getz. You can go to her Amazon page. We'll put a link there on our page where the show is podcasted. Thank you so much, Bracha, for coming on. Happy Hanukkah, and God bless you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tamar.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling for the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.